Hey guys, Nick here, and today we will be seeing how Glenn will react now that Negan is here once again in his presence to try and stop whatever's going on at Oceanside. And if Glenn's feud with Negan has ended even earlier than Negan and Maggie's current feud, or if it is just spiked up once again with Negan being here. This is part 7 to What If Negan Killed Maggie, the remake. Now, in the last episode, Negan showed up at the last minute whenever Rick was trying to solve things with Natanya and them, but Natanya got herself killed, and Cindy was still trying to exact the plan to kill the saviors who killed their people, but then Negan showed up. And everyone thinks now that he is either A, going to kill all of them and return to his old ways, or, try and save all of them, or he is here to exact some kind of revenge against Glenn or something. But Negan shakes any doubts of why he's here by saying that he's not just here to redeem himself with Glenn anymore, and he's not here just to redeem himself with Rick anymore. He's here to redeem himself with everybody, and that includes Oceanside's people, who he did not know that, well, he knew that Simon and Arat and everybody killed the men and boys of Oceanside, but they more or less did it behind his back, so he had no control over it. But he's here now because he wants to show that he has made all the saviors stand down and that he is ready to make amends in any kind of way for what he and his men have done. And Negan also says, jokingly, that Judith is in good hands with Carl, Enid, and Olivia. So there's no worries about him, leaving anything, considering the fact that whenever Rick and them were leaving, Negan was watching Judith. As I said, if you guys want to check that out, small detail. Rick smiles knowing that Negan even cares, and knowing that Negan really has changed, and this is far sooner than his original counterpart, because of the torture, basically, that Glenn brought onto him. Glenn even has to think about this for a second. Glenn's mind is finally starting to clear up, knowing that Negan really just was under a bad mindset whenever he did what he did to Maggie, and thinks about talking to him after the matter with Oceanside is solved, because he feels like he needs to definitely talk to Negan at this point. Cindy, who has listened to all of this and knows where Negan's coming from, and knows that it was genuinely not his fault, and hearing the fact that Simon is dead, but not Arat or any of the other saviors, decides to hold off proceedings and realizes that if this goes on, nobody's going to win, and says that peace will be restored just as long as Oceanside is given time to grieve over their losses. After everyone is getting ready to leave, Glenn pulls Negan aside and says that he wants to have a word with him. And Negan, feeling kind of unsure about this, still decides to go with it. Then Glenn smiles, which also throws off Negan, because the last time he saw Glenn smile, it was when he was being tortured back at the clearing. But this isn't a cocky smile. This isn't an even smile. This is Glenn being genuine and says, thank you. Thank you? Well, he says thank you because he never thought that Negan would go to this length to redeem himself, and knows now that Negan was 100% not meaning to kill Maggie. And not that it was Daryl's fault, but kinda was. But even with all that said, and knowing how serious Negan is for changing, he can't forgive him. He just can't. Maggie, and once again he says, Maggie just meant too much to him. And it's not something that can possibly ever be forgiven. But he's trying. And this is the conversation that Maggie had with Negan at the end of Season 11. But this is much sooner. This is getting into Season 8 territory. And this is Glenn and Negan having this conversation 3 seasons early, instead of Maggie and Negan right at the end of The Walking Dead, or, the original The Walking Dead. You guys get what I mean. But Glenn says that even though he can't forgive Negan, and even though this is something that he probably cannot promise, he's trying to forgive him. And he doesn't have to worry about Glenn killing him anymore. He's done with that. He just wants to mourn Maggie in peace and just make sure that everybody's on the same side. Negan really understands where Glenn is coming from and is glad that Glenn has not gone down the vengeful route and turn that he did, and that it's actually been simmered to a way where no one dies anymore, for now. Whenever everyone gets back to Alexandria, peace is slowly getting restored, and I mentioned mostly all the details of what happened after the Saviors and everything else, but here's something interesting. Sasha, she's still alive and on her own. And every now and again, she'll go to check on Glenn, because she cared about him, and knew how much he cared for Maggie, and was around Maggie a lot whenever she was still alive, and often sees him crying, mourning the loss of not only his wife, but his unborn baby. And the weight of it, a lot of the time, even though he's never acted on it to kill Negan anymore, it just really hurts to see Glenn like this. And Sasha realizes that Glenn's not alone here. She has lost people too, and she doesn't want to say this, but she understands that even though she didn't lose, like a relationship and a baby, she still lost people she cared about. Tyrese, Bob, Abraham. So she gets where Glenn is coming from. And over time, visiting him a bunch more, they actually begin to get a little love interest. And with their celebrated similarities of losing people, like, in such similar ways, this actually makes Sasha and Glenn a very likable love romance. And before that whole Sasha and Rosita and Glenn thing, like I said before, that was way too silly in my first What If Negan Killed Maggie, so I'm rectifying that here. Now we get into Season 9 territory. The whole bridge sequence, like the majority of my other stories, is going to be dealt with much easier because there's far more people, and even though we don't have Jadis and her people, and we have plenty of saviors, we don't have Oceanside killing the saviors, so things are dealt with a lot smoother here, and Rick gets to stay. Then we get the 6-year time skip. I know I'm skipping through that and might feel like I'm skipping through kind of important details, but with how the story's going, it's necessary. Anyways, you get the 6-year time skip with Judith, Rick, Michonne, Carl, and Enid all welcoming Yumiko and her group into the fray, and peace and everything is going pretty friggin' well so far. And Sadiq is still around, and he also welcomes Yumiko and her people too. Aaron also does not lose his arm here because there was never any savior problems or anything like that. So, that's, even though him getting the metal arm was cool and everything, I'm not saying that he's not going to get the metal arm in this story, which is something I've never really done, have him get it later in the story than his original counterpart, but it will happen in this story. Spoiler alert. And Eric is also still alive as well. With the whole Eugene and Rosita thing, I have to take a page out of my What If Rick Spared Shane remake, because that's the details that I have to offer. Because Spencer is still around, and if you guys don't know what I'm talking about and didn't watch that episode, basically with Spencer being around, that means that Eugene might still fall here, but Spencer would be around to likely catch him. And that means that Eugene would not hurt his leg, and Spencer would lure them away to shoot the flare gun to make sure that Eugene and Rosita were safe. Now, who goes to the cemetery? Yumiko and Magnus still go, Glenn and Sasha, and the rest are Rick, Michonne, Daryl, Jesus, Aaron, and Eric. So there's the whole group going to the cemetery. Might feel like I'm going a little fast here, but as I said, with parts in the story, that's just kind of how it goes. Now, for the cemetery, Sasha being there is a huge, huge help, because that means that any and all Whisperers or zombies alike are going to instantly be intercepted if they get close to being able to kill Jesus, which means that Jesus lives in this story too. Now, we get to the bridge sequence, which goes as you would expect with far more people, and Lydia is unmasked. Now, since Rick has not lost anyone close to him, because this is far later of a story, because think about it, this story's plot started at the beginning of season 7, so Carl is still around and everything, and Michonne's still around, so Rick's not going to have any second thoughts about sparing or killing Lydia, so she is imprisoned as a pretty easy decision. Now, with Benjamin being around, the story's going to go a little different for when Henry gets involved, because Henry does not get into trouble here, but I discussed that this means that Henry and Lydia would not get involved in my What If Rick Spared Shane remake. But the fact is, spoiler alert, with Maggie not being around, that means that the whole Elijah and Lydia thing is not going to happen, and Henry and Lydia are still going to get together in a different way. What do I mean by that? Well, I feel that even though Henry would be able to stay out of trouble with Benjamin around, because I feel he would stay to make sure his brother's doing the right thing, because, I feel that when Daryl interrogates Lydia, that Henry would overhear this, and this would actually spark their bond a little. But Henry wouldn't be imprisoned, because, again, he didn't do anything, he didn't drink and basically being stupid. But Henry and Lydia are going to get together, except it's going to be under different terms. Now, with the whole Alden and Luke getting kidnapped by Alpha thing, that Alden and Luke are still around, but I'm going to make things a little different here, and not just make it a clean cut of the original and other stories. I'm going to say that since these two characters are still around, Justin and Arot are the two to get kidnapped this time. And we get into the entrance of Alpha and the Whisperers, with two different people being kidnapped. Now, this poses an interesting question. With two saviors, a very unlikable one from Arot, because of the whole Oceanside and everything else thing, and Justin, will they be able to be saved like Luke and Alden were? Or will they be killed and pushed to the side? And how will the threat with Alpha go in this timeline with so many changes and so many characters living? And that's where we leave things for the moment. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode and are enjoying What If Negan Killed Maggie, the remake as a whole. Spoiler alert for when this story does end, because if you guys can't tell, it's not going to be the longest of my Walking Dead stories, because we're getting pretty close to its finale, but I'm working on What If Sophia Joined Negan right now for after. But I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys next time.